All right, it's another episode of Masters of Podcasting. My name's Melissa.
I'm Connolly.
And today we're going to talk about Season 2, Episode 10, Below the Belt.
The impotence train is leaving the station, Melissa.
Choo-choo! Let's ride the express train to Disappointment Town and Frustrationville. The express train to nowhere. All right.
Do you want to start out talking about Austin and Flo?
Sure. What did you kind of think of this development in the storyline? There was a lot of talk about how this could possibly be construed as male rape. You know, there were others who said they didn't get that much from it. What did you think of what happened, or kind of how did you interpret it?
I guess I don't really give that much consideration to Austin as, like, a character who would carry a serious storyline, because I did not see it as male rape. I saw it as... I mean, it was obviously manipulative on Flo's part, but, you know, she laid it out, come to my apartment for some sex that I schedule in between all of these calometric things. So, you know, he shows up at her house, and then he's kind of telling her all that stuff, which, in my mind, I was thinking was his equivalent of, I'm sorry, I don't want to fuck a fat girl.
Yeah,
You're not young and pretty, so I don't want to be with you. And then, surprisingly, his body said, "No, let's go ahead and do this."
Yeah, that was it seemed to exist in kind of this weird in-between place. And I think I'm not willing to make a judgment call on defining what this is until I get more information, until I see more about what happens after something like that happens, because I don't know, I can see where someone could look at that and say, well, you know, he was coerced into this, but at the same time, he didn't have to show up at her apartment. And if your response to that is, well, he would have lost his job if he hadn't gone over there. I'm sorry, he's a white male doctor in the 1960s. The fact that he was shamed or whatever away from maternity hospital, there are other hospitals out there where he could have gotten a job. I just don't quite see it the same way. He has other options out there. He's privileged.
Yeah, so I mean, it is manipulative on Flo's part as far as, you know, she's using the power that she has as his boss to, you know, get him to come to her place after hours. But like you pointed out, she doesn't have the kind of power over him that, say, if the roles were reversed, a man in that position would have over a woman.
And I think I'm not sure if this storyline serves as a counterpoint to Bill and Gini. If the writers were going in that direction, it's very subtle. And at the same time, we've sort of moved, I'm assuming we've kind of moved past the point where we're worried about Bill having power over Gini and sort of forcing her hand and making sex a requirement of her job, because obviously, there's a deeper emotional component to that, and it's more complex than that. So I guess my complaint about this storyline is that it doesn't really seem to fit. And like a lot of people, I don't understand why we're still focusing on calometric when that sort of seemed like a one-time joke from the season premiere. I just don't quite understand why we're still doing this beyond finding something for Austin to do.
Well, and see, then you mentioned that, you know, if they're the foils to Bill and Gini, and Bill and Gini have this very intimate emotional component of their relationship, then I'm wondering, you know, not that there's going to be some sort of epic romance between these two side characters, but, you know, is that where they're going to go with this, as far as, you know, an unexpected connection and commonalities between these two people who, you know, on the surface should have nothing in common and should never be together?
My impression taking away from it was just that it was kind of funny in an awful way that Austin was trying to protest and say, you know, I'm not attracted to anything except the blonde, skinny, white country club woman. And here he was responding. And of course, there's a lot to be said about how the body responds to physical stimulation apart from a person's internal feelings. You know, and I get that there's kind of a disparity there, or there can be, but at the same time, I just keep going back to the fact that he showed up at her apartment. And that's not to say that he was asking for it. It's just, I don't know. I just don't understand what this is trying to say.
Again, it's not a situation where he didn't have all the facts, and so, you know, he walked in thinking it was some sort of business thing, and then Flo said, oh yeah, you know, so-and-so chickie is not coming. take your pants off.
Exactly. It would have been completely different. He was aware of what she expected from him, and to some extent, I think that changes the situation a little.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it's one of those things. Austin has been such a comedic character for so long that I think trying to tip the scales and make him into this more tortured soul, I don't really know what that does, like, for the storyline necessarily, and I don't know that it lends credence for whatever they're trying to build here, whether it's just sort of a one-off kind of funny thing or just, the sad clown.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to wait until, to see the fallout or to see the follow-up, whichever it is, before I can really decide, how I feel about this. At this point, I think we just don't have enough information to really make a clear-cut judgment call on it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's move on and talk about Libby and her efforts at the Corps office and at the housing project.
I think this is a really fascinating storyline, but again, why have they waited until episode 10 to start, moving forward with it?
And I mean, unless this is going to carry over into season 3 and we're being set up for a cliffhanger, which is entirely possible, I mean, it's fascinating to see her slowly move toward understanding her, what is obvious to the audience, her internal attraction to Robert, and to kind of see her start to play penance for what she did to Coral. I don't know how I feel about that yet, but I did like that dig that Robert got in at her, that, the lice thing after however many years, that's still very fresh in both of their minds, clearly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say, it's nice that, while she is doing this impressive thing in volunteering for, a Black grassroots organization that's striving for social justice, at the same time, the show is not letting you forget, hey, remember when Libby did this racist thing?
Robert does, and Libby certainly does.
Completely racist or completely activist. It's nice that they try to give her that complexity, that human, oh, remember that time you were a horrible failure? Yeah, no, that happened.
And Robert kind of gets one of those moments, too, when he knocks on the door and the younger woman answers it, and you get the impression that he's a bit of a man about town, that he's a heartbreaker, and Libby is standing there watching from behind the corner, and she really gets a glimpse of kind of who he is, or who he is to that woman.
Yeah, I liked that, too.
What did you think of the little scene, it was really short, where Libby gets the sandwiches from the diner, doesn't notice that Bill and Gini are sitting in one of the booths, takes the sandwiches to the Corps office, and Bill follows her out there and is, staring at her kind of possessively or jealously? I couldn't really decide what his expression meant.
I thought it was kind of, jealous, and then it made me wonder how much that she has told him about, her, working for that office, did she just tell him she wanted to get out of the house? What does he think she's doing all day? Have they even talked about it?
Probably not, knowing these two.
Yeah, and so, I don't know what Bill thought she was doing to help them, but I guess it wasn't delivering sandwiches, so I took it as part surprise and then part kind of jealousy, possessiveness, why don't I know what you're doing? Why is this happening, essentially?
Yeah, and how interesting that he's got basically the woman of his dreams sitting in front of him. She's his sexual partner, she's his business partner, she's willing to sit there and take him seriously and talk about, this rival study that's claiming that they've stopped doing work and they're coming up with a plan, and suddenly he gets the urge to go and stare at his wife creepily. I mean, he has, very little reason to be concerned about that. It's kind of an odd little reminder that I guess Bill can be very controlling.
Well, I think it's a nice reminder, too, that, even as, I would say, as bonded as Bill and Ginny have become and are at this point in time, there's something in him that has feelings for Libby and is, concerned about Libby, because obviously, people who had no feelings about other people don't follow their wives into random buildings and stalk them from afar.
It's just it's a bit of a departure from what we've really had laid out for us as their marital dynamic for the last 2 seasons. It's just kind of, it's a bit of an exclamation point on, Bill and Libby are married and there's still something going on there.
There are still feelings.
As impossible as that may seem. What did you think of the scene where Libby asks Ginny to lie to Bill for her? That was really funny.
I thought it was funny, but I didn't really lend more credence to it than that. I thought it was a kind of hilarious wink, and I like the way that Caitlin Fitzgerald delivered it, like, oh, unless you feel uncomfortable, then you don't have to lie. I'll just lie.
Jenny's like, no, I'm not uncomfortable. I'll lie all day and night if I have to.
Well, I liked it, too, because, here's Libby just trying to pass off, like, you can just lie. I'll lie, too. It'll be fine. And we know that Libby is not really the best liar when it comes down to it, but she does try.
It's true. It's true.
I like the way that they've handled the storyline so far, as Libby not being the magical person to come in and unlock all of the problems that they had been having in core. I think it's good that she's sort of being set straight and that people are having to show her, like, these are the things that you will be doing as a volunteer. You're not just going to waltz in here from the suburbs and lead everyone out into Egypt. Yeah,
true. And she really had to kind of fight for the ability to join the rest of them, and she got the chance. She took her chance to prove herself dedicated by showing up even though they told her not to. Kind of like, oh, you're just a little suburban princess, you're not going to like this. It's not going to be very safe or very, very fun for you.
And I think they do have a point in telling her the reality of that situation because, obviously that is going to matter.
Right, absolutely.
Rich white lady shows up at your door.
Yeah,
out of your shitty apartment.
But she seemed to find a way to reach some of the residents by appealing to, like, the grandmother who was out in the hallway. She may have been really strategic in who she was talking to. We don't know.
Well, I think that was a nice way to play it on the show's part because, as we've seen, Libby does have, the sort of skills that would make her good at canvassing and organizing people and really rallying people to, donate or to, side with a certain cause. So definitely it could be something that she could be very good at, but at the same time, she is navigating her way through this process and through, this type of activism. And I think it's good that we're getting to see the beginning steps. It's not just she's being thrown in and suddenly she's magical at it.
Yeah. Do we have anything else to say about Libby?
I don't.
All right. Should we move on?
Let's see. Do we want to talk about Essie and Bill and Frank?
My goodness, what a messed up family.
I really like in the earlier scenes of this episode where Bill and Essie have that bonding moment by talking about how much they hate Frank.
Yeah, that's sort of the one touch point where they've managed to agree with each other and get along with each other is, man, what a shithead he is, right? Hasn't he just become the worst?
God, every time he talks, I just want to punch him in the face.
Every time he talks about AA, I want another shot a little more, just to spite him.
Do you think that Essie is an alcoholic?
I don't. Not only because of the times that we're in, but she assured her sons that she has one Tom Collins a night, and I believe her. The fact that there was a car accident, I think that's meant to kind of play with 2014 expectations and assumptions, and to kind of play into something that happens with Frank during the fighting scene. It is, yes, obviously drinking and driving is bad, but given the context of the times, no, I don't think she's an alcoholic necessarily. I think Frank has a tendency to look for that because he's a new-ish member of AA, and that seems to be, for some members, that can be a bit of a pitfall, is starting to see your own problem in everyone else, projecting that onto others, especially your immediate family.
Well, and I think, too, while I would not go so far as to say that the Masters have never been dependent on alcohol to soothe some of their problems, I don't think that Essie is an alcoholic, and I don't think that Bill's an alcoholic.
Bill is not addicted to alcohol. Bill is addicted to Virginia.
Yeah,
that's very clear. There's a very big distinction there. He does abuse alcohol sometimes to, make things not feel quite so sharp or to lessen his guilt. But
right.
if he has an ism, it's an addiction to Virginia.
Again, it was interesting to me because I know we were talking earlier, isn't really something that's addressed in the show so much as it is in the book, that Bill's and Frank's father wasn't raging alcoholic who just beat his sons in a drunken stupor. So I thought that the way that the show addressed it was interesting because, I could see Frank, especially as someone who has just found out that he's an alcoholic, that he cannot be trusted, looking to his father and trying to pinpoint the drinking together, and especially the fact that alcoholism has that genetic disposition, essentially, where it can be passed down, from generation to generation. I think that makes sense that Frank would automatically look at his father and say, well, he drank and he abused us, he was an alcoholic, and so am I.
But it becomes very clear because Bill's memory of the same scenario is that their father had one drink a night, and that was it. And I believe Bill, because I think Bill has an excellent memory, apart from, the fact that he denies that Frank was ever abused. He wouldn't have been there for that. So it's not that Bill has a faulty memory. I think he has a very clear memory of exactly what happened. I think the problem here is, like you say, Frank is rationalizing his father's behavior by attaching this story, by kind of victimizing him in a way by saying, well, he had, alcoholism and he had his own demons, and rationalization is, I think, what really sets Bill off, because the act of turning their father from a bully into a complex person with his own problems invalidates all of Bill's suffering and his coping mechanisms and his justification for being a very cold, detached person over the years. And I think he knows that his life would have been very different had there not been a reason to do all of that. His personality would be completely different and the trajectory of his life would be so different. I mean, yes, of course, that's an obvious thing to say, but still, to have that sudden realization is going to prompt some, outrage and some lashing out. I'm not saying that Bill's reaction was rational or appropriate. I mean, he was very cruel to his brother, but at the same time, Frank is not exactly in the clear as far as being, having the upper hand. He's using AA as a means to feel morally superior and to make himself feel better, and it's not the best way to go through the program. I mean, he goes around telling people, well, I forgive you. It's not about that. He's supposed to be apologizing to people for things that he himself has done. And I don't know if he fundamentally misunderstands that, or if he just is just kind of going off the rails with his resentment of what happened to him in his youth. But he's not approaching AA from the best standpoint, and he learns a very hard lesson that, what binds them together is not this alcoholism that he has assigned the whole family. It's the random chaos of being abused for absolutely no reason. There is no reason, and that's what has completely fucked them all up.
Yeah, I think, too, that this is where Bill has more clarity and not necessarily more closure, because obviously, neither of them have closure. They're never going to get closure.
Mm-hmm.
But Bill at least has realized that, his father just, did this. It wasn't something that he couldn't control. It wasn't something that...
It wasn't some outside determining factor, at least as far as Bill knows.
Yeah, exactly. So, to Bill it was just, my father was a
monster
human being who, logically and coldly chose to inflict that kind of abuse onto other people. So I feel like Bill, at least, although God knows he's never going to come to any, I think, life-altering realizations about, what happened to him, at least he knows that much, that, it wasn't, as you said, determined by outside factors. It was something that happened to them that did not have to happen, that his father chose to do. Meanwhile, Frank is sort of not in denial about that, but he's so obsessed with finding a reason for why it happened and what could have possibly driven his father to do that to his son, that it just, I think it's just sort of gone into his head and just twisted, any thought that Frank could have had as far as moving on and really understanding what happened to him.
Yeah, I will be interested to see if Frank and Pauline leave town, if he sticks around and tries to stay the course with convincing Bill that, his perspective is correct, if he changes his mind and they sort of come to a new understanding and actually achieve some sort of, filial bonding. I don't know. I'll be interested to see if his character sticks around after a huge punch out like that, because part of it really did seem like Bill wanted to teach Frank a very cruel and harsh lesson, and they were kind of role-playing in a way with, becoming their father and becoming each other in that scene. But at the same time, it was kind of Bill, you get the feeling that Bill is punishing, he wants to be punched in the face and punished for his perception of having abandoned his brother. Like, he deserves to be punched in the face for something that he admittedly could not have controlled at the age of 14. There was nothing he could have done, and hopefully, God willing, Ginny would, say something and be like, you were a kid. What were you supposed to do, honestly? Because I think that may be part of the problem that he's experiencing is getting past the idea that he absolutely had to be a man at the age of 14 and take his lumps, and, he did this horrible thing to his brother.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It was self-loathing, and then it was also just sort of rage that Bill has not been able to express in any other way, as far as, what happened to them, and the fact that, his father continued to inflict this abuse onto Frank once Bill was out of the house, and all sorts of, I think, toxic masculinity kind of issues stemming from those formative years.
Yeah, definitely. And so, speaking of Bill expressing himself, would you like to move on to Bill and Ginny?
I would.
All right. What do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about the final revelation or kind of the failed experiments first?
Let's talk about the failed experiments.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Well, I guess we might as well start with the first one. I think you mentioned earlier when we were first talking about the episode how that was very, I would say, servile on Jenny's part, because there was a lot of pressure riding on it, and it was mostly, I'm going to focus all my attention on you, and then, you will magically be healed and not impotent.
And it was very much the male fantasy of a woman completely taking care of the man's needs with absolutely no concern about her own self. And it just doesn't work. And there is that very powerful scene where she's in bed and she starts talking about Michelangelo and all the effort that he had to go through to get this perfect, painting. And Bill is in the bathroom just looking at himself, haunted and just terrible. And he has to turn the faucet on to drown her out. But then it's completely taken a step back. It was so funny. I don't know if you heard this, but right as he turns on the water and the scene cuts, she says, I've even heard that hypnosis works. Which is such a funny solution. Hypnotize a guy and get him to have an erection. That's just, what a wild idea.
Now I'm just wondering who they contact as far as sex hypnosis goes.
Ginny gets out a pocket watch and says, all right, let's go.
Yes, hello. May I please speak to hypnotist?
She's a very hands-on type woman, so maybe she was thinking that she could go to a hypnotist and then take some good tips to Bill.
She'd have to pretend to be sexually impotent.
Yeah. Then there's that second scenario where she ties him up and dominates him. And it's clear that if she hadn't gotten overconfident and jumped the gun on trying to, get something started, that it would have worked, because Bill kind of does like that because of how taboo it is and how many walls he's built up against begging or letting someone else take over. But again, we see this, it's kind of this two examples of the power dynamic between them. Ginny serving and then Ginny in control, and the unspoken opposite of that in both of those scenarios, and they kind of don't work. And it's the third setup where they're both framed and costumed and just pictured within the scene very parallel to each other and very similar to each other. And I noticed at the very end that neither one of them rolls on top of the other. Like, they're just perfectly parallel to each other, and there's no one person in control. They're just both acting together parallel to each other. I know I said that before, but that just really strikes me as it's not perfect equality. It's more like they're on the same playing level. They're both...
They're on the same plane.
They're on the same plane. They actually physically are in space and also emotionally, I think.
Well, and I think what was funny about the first, or not the first instance, but the second attempt at curing Bill's impotence was, obviously, like you said, it's very taboo. They flipped the dominance roles to the point where, Bill actually does get excited, and then they're both hilariously surprised by that.
The looks on their faces, they're both like, it's working! Holy shit!
So, I think if they had sort of maybe explored that a little bit, not to the extent that Jenny wanted, where she was just sort of like, oh, great, you're working, here we go. I think if she had maybe taken her time and they had gone that route, it would have worked pretty well.
And it's so telling that, I think they could not, after that had happened, there was no way that they could have tried it again, even days later, just because of how much shame they both feel associated with it. So much so that Jenny, who, in the scene where it was a couple of episodes ago, I think it might have been Asterion, where he sits her down and he's like, yeah, we're going to have sex, but it's going to be me acting on you, and here's a laundry list of everything I'm going to do to you. She's laying there in the bed in the aftermath, just totally naked, like she doesn't care. Here, however, she is so ashamed of herself, and the situation is so awful and cringeworthy that she has to cover herself up. That's how bad it is, and Ginny is the sort of person who isn't normally like that, as in the scenes that we've seen so far. Like, she doesn't instinctively reach for a bathrobe every time she, gets done having sex with someone. It's a very very telling moment.
Well, and I like too that they really let that awkwardness land. It wasn't just like, oh, whoops, that failed, and then cut to 2 hours later it literally walked us through, okay, well, this is terribly awkward and you feel like shit, and we're just gonna sit here side by side until you maybe feel like talking ever again.
I couldn't even watch it the first time that I couldn't watch it. It was so, I was watching through my fingers, and I was just like, I can't deal with this. This is so awful. Given, how much these two have shared with each other, it was just like the worst moment.
Meanwhile, I was cackling with glee and ready to eat some popcorn like that.
They're terrible. We're so different. We get 2 failed incidents, and then the one that is successful, at least as far as we know, because it kind of cuts out before we get too far into it. But like you were mentioning, we were talking before the episode, and you said, did they actually get anything, accomplished? If you listen with headphones, if you watch the episode with the volume up and you pay a lot of attention, there are some suboral cues, namely the sound of a zipper, and there's some gasping. So they definitely got what they didn't even go in with the expectation that they were going to do this, and I think that's part of it. I think it's kind of a cocktail. The success comes from a lot of different facets. The fact that she stuck around even though he's at his lowest point, and there's the fact that there's no pressure. They didn't go into this thinking, all right, now we're going to tackle this issue. It's spontaneous, and also that it was just a really warm, human, sympathetic moment, and it didn't involve this constant power play between them. It was just a very human, loving moment.
And I think too, part of why I think, as you said, it worked so well was that not only were they on the same plane physically and emotionally, but Bill, for a change, was actually reaching out to Jenny, saying that he needed her.
Yeah, I think the admission that he'd given up was like the magic phrase. It was like what made everything fall into place. You're willing to admit that, admitting that you have a problem is the first step, and from there you can finally crawl your way out of the hole.
Right.
What did you think of him smearing his blood over her face?
Okay, well, you said you couldn't watch when after they had the very awkward sexual encounter the second time around, this was the part where I kind of gave it my TV the side eye, because much as I love Bill and Jenny, that was a little bit weird to me.
I admit that it was a little weird. I thought it was really sweet. In a weird way, but I think it's one of those moments that only makes sense if you're actually a participant in them. If you're observing, it's just kind of like, what the fuck is going on over there?
Dude, he just put his blood on you.
Like, what are you doing? And for a second, it kind of looked like Ginny was looking at him like, what's happening right now?
Yeah. No, I definitely got that sense.
I was
very early in the moment.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, and I know that this is going to sound really gross and weird, but I think it's kind of, I mean, not only is it a primal act, you know, there's the violence and gore of being in a fight, and I don't think that either of them were aroused by having been involved in a fight in some capacity, but there is that kind of connection between sex and violence and very, very much the primality of it. But in a way, it's kind of like they're sharing different body fluids with each other. You know, they've got sex, which is one form, and then there's kissing, which is swapping saliva. And now there's, you know, blood being introduced. It's like they've completed this cycle in a sense of sharing themselves totally with one another. It's all the facets of physicality, and now, you know, it's kind of upgraded their game, and now they're sort of being forced to move on to sharing it on a deeper emotional level. Maybe I'm over applying analysis to this, but I can see where maybe it could be perceived that way.
Well, and it's kind of like, I know I mentioned where when kids prick their fingers and decide they're going to be, you know, blood brothers or blood sisters or whatever people call it nowadays. I don't know if anyone still does this. But no, I mean, it did seem to be something like that where, you know, you don't want to, I wouldn't necessarily call it childish, but it's very, like you said, primal and strange and weird, and yet it's happening.
Yeah. I mean, I read somewhere where someone thought that he was kind of sharing the taint of his guilt with her. I didn't so much get that out of it. It was more like he was sharing the fact that he had absolutely hit rock bottom, and I think he appreciated the fact that even though he told her she didn't have to stick around, like she could just leave whenever, she still, you know, managed to hold on to such an awkward moment and kind of help see him through it. But then at the same time, you know, when someone tells you, oh, you don't have to stay, and they're, you know, in a bad place, you're sort of morally obligated to stick around regardless of what they're saying to you. But still,
well, I think anytime the words "you don't have to stay" are uttered, usually you do have to stay.
Usually you do have to stay, yes. But I mean, that doesn't detract from the fact that it was nice that she did stick around and, you know, was sympathetic, and
I agree.
Yeah. So,
do we have anything else to say about Bill and Jenny as far as Team Impotence goes?
I'm trying to think. Did we want to mention a little bit about, I don't have anything specific to say about it, but it is kind of exciting that there's a television crew getting involved in documenting their process. From the previews for the next episode, it looks like it's not going to go very well at first, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it'll be interesting to see it play out, but it's not something that I'm dying to have resolution on, mainly because, you know, we all know how this goes, but
see, and I think it's going to introduce a new twist, because I think it's going to, from the clips that they've released, it's very much Bill sitting around whining about how he isn't good at this, how this is so hard, this is, you know, he's not attractive enough, he's not good enough, and Jenny's kind of sitting there thinking about herself, and he's sort of gotten to this place, it seems like anyway, where he kind of expects her to constantly be stepping in and soothe him and comfort him, and when she doesn't, he gets a little snippy. So I think it's going to be another,
like, see Stroppy Bill Masters come back. Honestly.
It is not going to be like a lovely resolution. Like, it's going to be another shitty twist.
But see, I'm fine with that. I mean,
it wouldn't be a show without it.
Grim and huffy and annoyed, and then Jenny is kind of like, I can't believe I have to deal with this bozo on a daily basis.
Fuck you and your problems. God damn it.
Yeah, so, you know, they go through that, and then, like, a few weeks later they cycle back to, nope, can't keep my hands off you. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah, so, yeah. And
I'd be totally fine if they went back to that, you know, sort of old dynamic, but maybe that's just me. I'm entertained by the little things.
We'll see. Do you have anything else to say about this episode?
I don't. I'm mildly thinking about Lester and Barbara, but I have nothing to say about that other than,
It's clear that they're going to wind up together. I mean, I think that's very much where it's headed.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think that they could be with anyone else at this point.
No. But yeah, I don't have any insightful remark to say about that. It's just, oh, Lester and Barbara. Okay.
What a cute couple.
Yeah.
They're a fun pair. All right, you've been listening to another episode of Masters of Podcasting. If you have anything that you want us to talk about in the episode, any questions, you can drop an ask in the Tumblr ask box. The Tumblr name is FuckYeahMOS. Always fun to say. As always, thank you for listening.
Bye.
We'll see you next time.